In today's complex economic environment, it is crucial for students to grasp the concepts of budgets, deficits, and debt. These terms are frequently used in discussions about the financial health of governments, businesses, and individuals. Understanding how these concepts interrelate and their potential consequences is essential for making informed decisions as citizens, consumers, and future policymakers. A budget is a financial plan that outlines expected revenues and expenditures over a specific period, usually a year. Governments, businesses, and individuals all create budgets to manage their financial resources effectively. Government budgets exist at the federal, state, and local levels, each with its own unique set of revenue sources and spending priorities. Budget outcomes can be classified into two categories: budget surpluses and budget deficits. A budget surplus occurs when revenues exceed expenditures. This situation allows for saving, investing, or paying down existing debt. Governments with budget surpluses have the flexibility to allocate extra funds toward projects or programs that can benefit society or stimulate economic growth. On the other hand, a budget deficit occurs when expenditures exceed revenues. Deficits can arise from various factors, such as decreased tax revenues during economic downturns, increased government spending on programs or services, or unanticipated events like natural disasters or military conflicts. When a government experiences a budget deficit, it must find ways to bridge the gap between revenues and expenditures, often through borrowing or increasing taxes. Deficit spending refers to the practice of a government spending more money than it collects in revenues. Governments may engage in deficit spending to stimulate economic growth, especially during recessions or periods of economic stagnation. By increasing spending on infrastructure projects, social programs, or tax cuts, governments aim to boost aggregate demand and encourage economic activity. In the short term, deficit spending can have positive effects on the economy. Increased government spending can create jobs, stimulate consumer spending, and spur business investment. This, in turn, can lead to higher economic output and a faster recovery from economic downturns. However, persistent deficit spending can have long-term consequences. When a government continually spends more than it earns, it must borrow money to cover the difference. This borrowing adds to the national debt, which is the accumulation of all previous budget deficits. As the national debt grows, the government must allocate an increasing portion of its budget to pay interest on the debt, potentially crowding out other important spending priorities. High levels of national debt can also have implications for economic growth and stability. If investors lose confidence in a government's ability to repay its debts, they may demand higher interest rates on government bonds, making it more expensive for the government to borrow money. This can lead to a vicious cycle of increasing debt and rising interest costs, potentially hindering economic growth and leading to fiscal crises. The national debt is the total amount of money that a federal government owes to its creditors. It is the accumulation of all previous budget deficits minus any budget surpluses used to pay down the debt. It is important to distinguish between the deficit, which refers to the annual difference between revenues and expenditures, and the debt, which represents the total amount owed over time. The national debt is composed of two main categories: public debt and intra-governmental holdings. Public debt includes the money owed to domestic and foreign creditors who have purchased government securities, such as treasury bills, notes, and bonds. Intragovernmental holdings represent the money that the federal government owes to various government accounts, such as the Social Security and Medicare trust funds. A high national debt can have several implications for the economy. First, the government must allocate a significant portion of its budget to pay interest on the debt, which can divert resources away from other important spending priorities, such as education, infrastructure, or social programs. Second, high debt levels can lead to concerns about a government's creditworthiness, potentially resulting in lower credit ratings and higher borrowing costs. Additionally, a high national debt can crowd out private investment. When the government borrows heavily, it competes with private businesses for available funds in financial markets, potentially leading to higher interest rates and reduced access to credit for private firms. This can hinder economic growth and job creation in the private sector. Finally, a high national debt raises concerns about generational equity. When a government accumulates large amounts of debt, it essentially borrows from future generations to finance current spending. This can place a significant burden on younger generations who may face higher taxes, reduced government services, or slower economic growth as a result of the debt incurred by previous generations. Understanding budgets, deficit spending, and the national debt is essential for students as they become informed citizens and future decision makers. Recognizing the short-term benefits and long-term consequences of deficit spending can help students evaluate the trade-offs involved in government fiscal policies. Grasping the composition and implications of the national debt can enable students to participate meaningfully in public debates about government spending, taxation, and borrowing. As students navigate their personal financial lives and engage with the broader economy, their knowledge of these concepts will prove invaluable. By applying the principles of budgeting and fiscal responsibility to their own lives and advocating for sound economic policies, students can contribute to a more stable and prosperous future for themselves and their communities. In an increasingly interconnected and complex world, a solid foundation in economic principles, including deficits and debt, will empower students to make informed decisions, engage in constructive dialogue, and shape the fiscal landscape for generations to come.